with what has happened in the last few months, it has resurrected in the minds of the Indian policymakers and Indian people that US can be an unreliable and coercive partner as it has been in the past.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host, Anil Padmanabhan. Last week, frenemy fire from the United States hit a new low. The gloves came off, as it were, when in a media interview, the US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said India needed to be healed. The exact word he used was that India needed to be fixed. It immediately put India's foreign policy under scrutiny as it scrambled to undo the fresh damage done by the Trump presidency. This is because India's audacious economic ambitions rest on its ability, or rather the ability of foreign policy, to undo these knots and resolve these headwinds that have emerged almost from nowhere. Can Indian foreign policy pull this off? To answer this and more, we are fortunate enough to have in our studios today Ambassador Arun Singh. Ambassador Singh, among various capacities, also served as India's ambassador to the United States and someone who understands both the economic side of issues as well as the foreign policy issues and the intersection. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thanks, Anil. Delighted to be with you.
Thank you. Ambassador, I wanted to go back to what I said in the intro, the Commerce Secretary Lutnick's remarks. He says we need to fix India. What do you make of this?
So I would put it this way, that clearly the India-US relationship is going through a difficult phase. And I would say this is largely because of the domestic politics of Donald Trump and not because of any structural issues between India and the United States. And if I look at the domestic politics of Donald Trump that has brought us to this situation, one could say there are at least four elements in it. One is clearly that Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize, and he said that publicly. So when the India-Pakistan conflict happened in May, Op Sindoor, following the terrorist attack in Pahalgam, Donald Trump saw in it an opportunity for himself to try and claim that he played a role in the ceasefire and enhance his claim for a Nobel Peace Prize, arguing that it was a major conflict, both are nuclear-capable countries. Now, India's position has been consistent and firm for a long time, especially since 1972, that there is no role for any third party in India-Pakistan issues. And the reason for it is that in the 1950s, 1960s, third parties, particularly US and UK, did play a role to try and resolve this issue. And we had found then that their role was very biased. And they were looking at their own interest, not the actuality of the situation. So given that, so we couldn't support him there. And clearly, I think it irritated him a bit. And it's quite clear from some of the comments that have come from there. The second thing that happened was that he was trying to project to his base that he was getting unilateral trade agreements where only the US was benefiting. For example, Indonesia and Vietnam, the US claimed had completely opened up their markets, and yet US imposed 20% tariffs. He said Japan has opened up its market significantly and has promised to invest more than $550 billion in the United States, and then went on to claim that this Japanese investment would be a sovereign wealth fund of the United States, and the President Trump would decide where it would be invested, and after a while, from the profits generated, 90% would go to the US Treasury. Very unusual agreement. Now, clearly in Japan, there was a backlash, and one of the reasons cited for the Prime Minister resigning was the negative reaction to this trade agreement. Similarly, and yet Japan got a 15% tariff. Similarly, South Korea got a 15% tariff, and they had promised to invest $350 billion in the US. Today, South Korea says that they're not in a position to do that investment. So because of their dependence on the US, they were agreeing to this. Now, if you look at Europe, they have promised to invest $600 billion in the US, do more than $750 billion worth of energy purchase from the US, open up their market in certain sectors, yet 15% tariffs. So he was able to claim that I'm getting unilateral benefits. Now, from all accounts, the India-US trade agreement was fairly advanced in terms of the negotiations. It was documented. All the other agreements that we've spoken about were not actually documented agreements. They were sort of broad agreement on a framework, and the negotiations would begin. The India-US agreement was fairly well documented, and it had benefits from both sides. And again, from reports in the public domain, it is clear that India was far more forward-leaning in terms of market access than it has been in the past. But there were advantages for India also. So when it went up to Trump in July, after the irritation that he felt since May, he saw that there is no unilateral gain for myself. And so he rejected that. So I think it is because of some of these elements in his domestic politics that we are in this situation. And the people around him are amplifying the message so as to be in the good books of Donald Trump. So I don't see the comments of either Pete Navarro, Scott Bessent, or the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick as anything more, rather than just amplifying what they feel may be President Trump's mood at the moment, and see if they can help them get even more in his good books.
True. I mean, they're operating like echo chambers.
Absolutely.
We saw that very sad scene where the cabinet was lining up one by one to praise. It was like right out of Julius Caesar.
And why only the cabinet? Today the mood that has been created in the US is where every institution in US society, one can argue, is living in a climate of worry and fear. You saw a recent scenario of 20 leading technology leaders of the US around the dining table of the president, and every one of them basically praising the president for the great contribution he's making to US economy and technology. So there is a climate of fear, clearly. And all the institutions, earlier US used to talk about itself as a very strong democracy, strong institutions, checks and balances. At the moment, that institutional checks and balances have collapsed. The Congress, which saw itself as the US Congress as the co-equal branch of government, is not able to stand up to them. Companies are giving in. Universities are making compromises. Law firms are making compromises. So it's a particular situation in the US that I have not seen for a long, long time.
True. It's almost like fear over the city. I mean, the fact no Indian American, HNI has uttered a word ever since the Trump presidency took off, on this.
Well, why only draw attention to them? I would say that most stakeholders in the US-India relationship for some time went silent because they were worried about their own position. For example, US businesses heavily invested in the India relationship. India is among top 10 trading partners of the US. For us, US is our largest trading partner. US companies have invested more than $60 billion in India and is the largest single country investment into India. Indian companies have invested more than $40 billion in the US and have a presence across all 50 states. We have today more than 1,700 global capability centers doing cutting-edge R&D and technology development work for the global operations of multinational companies. 60% of them are owned by US multinationals. But all of them went silent because they were worried about their own business in the US. They didn't want those to come under fire from Trump. And in many cases, they were trying to protect their China investments, which is much more than the India investment. So given all that, they went silent on this. Or if you look at the US Congress, the largest single country caucus in the US House of Representatives and in the US Senate is the India caucus. They were by and large silent. So I think because of this climate of fear, but now voices have started coming out. If you saw House Foreign Affairs Democrats issued a statement The American Jewish Committee issued a statement that they were mystified by the approach of the administration. Then some other leading technology people in the think tank community, some former officials, Bill Burns, who was director CIA, and others have commented that US is in a position to lose India, and all the effort that has been made over the past 25 years could be negatively impacted. Correct. So voices are emerging. And some leading Indian Americans, I saw Fareed Zakaria, Nikki Haley, some others in the Silicon Valley, and some congressmen, Ro Khanna, have come out with statements criticizing what the administration has done.
True. So I'm very curious, how does India pursue its strategy of strategic autonomy in these circumstances, given that we are veering to a multipolar world? So strategic autonomy is actually a very smart strategy. Mm-hmm. But can it conduct itself in that manner, given the costs which it will have to bear, particularly from the largest country, most powerful country in the world?
No, absolutely, Anil. So I would say that given the recent experience we had, including with the US since May, it would emphasize even more the need for India to maintain the strategic autonomy of its decision making. Now, the fact is that in the last 25 years, both India and the US have put in a lot of effort to consolidate the relationship. Before 2000, it was a very difficult relationship. In 1998, for example, when we had done our nuclear tests, US had imposed sanctions on us and had sort of tried to galvanize the world to impose sanctions on India. That started changing with the visit of US President Clinton in 2000. And I think the Clinton administration absorbed that needed to have a different relationship with a country of India's size, which had certain capabilities, including in terms of advanced nuclear technology. Since then, with each administration with the US, Republican and Democratic, their relationship has consolidated at each stage. George Bush did the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement with India. It was historic. Started the process of unraveling all the technology restrictions on India. President Obama declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council. Visited India twice. No US president had done that. Was chief guest on Republic Day. No US president had done that. President Trump, in his first term, joined Prime Minister Modi in Houston at a rally of 50,000 Indian Americans. I think he was looking for funding support, votes from the Indian American community. And then he put India on what was called STA Level 1, Strategic Trade Authorization Level 1 for highest level technology release. And after that, President Biden did the initiative on critical and emerging technologies, talking of a partnership between India and the US in cutting edge technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum. You do all that when you want to project that you have confidence in the relationship. So step by step, there was a sense that the relationship was deepening, that they were looking with confidence to a future partnership and wanted to consolidate it. But with what has happened in the last few months, it has resurrected in the minds of the Indian policymakers and Indian people that US can be an unreliable and coercive partner as it has been in the past. Now, given that, if I look at it, why is it that Indonesia and Vietnam compromised so much? It is because they were export dependent on the US. Why is it that Japan, South Korea and Europe caved into US demands? Because they are security dependent on the US. Europe through NATO, Japan and South Korea vis-a-vis North Korea and China need the US umbrella. Because they were security dependent, they were not able to resist US pressure. Therefore, one would argue that given India's history and how we see our own role in the international context, and we want to maintain the strategic autonomy of our decision making because we want to be able to take decisions based on our assessment of our own interests, not because somebody else is telling us, because they will be looking after their interest. So given that, I think there is no alternative for India, that you must certainly continue to try and deepen the US partnership. It's the largest global economy, largest consumer market. But even as you're doing that, you must hedge more. You must diversify more. You must make sure that no one economy or entity has so much leverage over you that it is able to constrain your decision making. And I think if you look at today's global situation, the main contestation is between China, Russia, and the United States. Russia has been a long time a good partner. Today it's an important defense partner, important energy partner. But in the civilian economy, it doesn't have the economic size and technological strengths that others have. So for the aspirations that India has to emerge as a developed economy, Russia cannot really support you in that. Now there is China, is the second largest economy globally, largest trading partner, more than 100 countries, tremendous developments in technology. So one can argue that there is some advantage in perhaps increasing from the current level the economic and technology linkages with China. But we have to keep in mind that China will try and use that for coercion and leverage. Even today, they have export restrictions on rare earths, magnets. And China has used its coercion against other countries, Japan at times, Australia, South Korea. So you don't want China to get into that leverage. Now, US, one can argue, despite the uncertainty you see now, in terms of India's comprehensive national interest, is an important partner. Largest trading partner, largest investment partner at 5.4 million, largest single country presence of Indian origin diaspora, largest single country presence of Indian students in universities. So we have no option but to try and deepen. But you'll need to hedge. So I think given all this, I would expect that there'll be even more focus in India on maintaining the autonomy of our decision making.
You've set it out very well as to what foreign policy can do to undo these knots. But there's another side to it, which is domestic economic policy. For whatever reasons, India has delayed or not undertaken serious economic reforms. So structural fault lines are visible. Simple example, most Indian goods are not globally competitive. So which is why you need tariff protection and so on. So this inability to pursue structural reforms, doesn't that weaken the clout that foreign policy can have?
So Adil, let me first say that I'm not an expert on the Indian economic dimension, but that having been said, clearly you will have much more clout if your economic size is larger. Now, if I just take one example, in 1980, Chinese GDP was the same as India's GDP. Today, Chinese GDP is 5 times India's GDP. Their military expenditure is 4 or 5 times India's military expenditure. Now, as a result of this growth on Chinese GDP, you can see the enhanced impact that they are having. They have a growing presence in the Indian Ocean. They have a base in Djibouti. They have a growing presence in South Asia. They have leases or ownership of ports in Europe. They are reaching Europe through the Arctic. They are reaching Europe through rail connectivity. They are today, as I mentioned earlier, largest trading partner, more than 100 countries. So when you have enhanced economic size, you create also more opportunities for other countries to engage with you. So in terms of the role that we see for ourselves or would like to see for ourselves in the international context, if we want to enhance the appeal of India to other partners, aside from the other dimensions that we have, I think the size of the economy, the technological strengths would be essential. So a larger, stronger Indian economy with enhanced technological strengths would certainly enable India to pursue its foreign policy objectives with greater effectiveness.
And how do you see, you talked earlier about how India will pursue strategic, hedging as it moves forward. So, but at the same time, we are seeing that global supply chains are being realigned because of geopolitics. Primarily, it was earlier between the United States and China, but now other countries are also getting involved. So what are the opportunities? Like I do know offhand, the IMEC corridor was one alternative supply chain, especially since the Houthis have almost shut down the Red Sea corridor. So what are the opportunities you see India, coming India's way when this kind of realignment takes place?
No, sure. So in fact, I would say that when a very conscious effort at realigning the global supply chain was being done, In India, there was a sense that there would be opportunity for us. Because in the first phase of globalization of trade and production, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and we were faced with the unipolar world, where the US wanted to completely try and dismantle any kind of tariff or non-tariff barriers on trade so that US capital could move freely across the world to gain advantage for themselves. So in that phase, we benefited to some extent. We benefited in the services sector. Growth rate in India went up. Large number of people in India came out of poverty. But China benefited hugely, and China benefited in the manufacturing sector. Today, Chinese GDP is about 18% of global GDP, but they have 32% of global manufacturing value added. Now, reordering started because there was a political sort of fallout in the United States. US capital had benefited, US GDP had benefited, it grew. But the top 1% in the US benefited disproportionately. They were generating 40% of the income and 40% of the wealth. So the middle 40 to 50% felt that they were losing out in this process. Their wages stagnated, death rates went up, longevity came down, drug addiction went up. So this is the segment that has brought somebody like Donald Trump to power. And so Donald Trump wants to reorder the supply chain and tell these people that he's trying to do things that will benefit them. So certainly for India, potentially there was an advantage that if there is a reordering of supply chains, perhaps we could look at the new opportunity to bring manufacturing also to India. If in India there was some excitement about the initiative on critical and emerging technologies with the US, the idea was that in this newer technologies, India and US would do co-development, leading to production sharing, and then facilitate trade in these areas. So that was the approach. But the new message that is coming out from the United States would be challenging some of the assumptions because, in his initial comments, Donald Trump said that I don't want US companies to invest in China, to hire in India. I don't want supplies coming from elsewhere. I'm going to impose tariffs. And, for example, the 50% tariffs as of today that are on India, unless they are changed. So this is going to hinder somewhat our ability to plug into the supply chains, at least as far as the US is concerned. But I think there will be opportunities for us. We have done a free trade agreement with the UK, which is significant. We are looking at finalizing a free trade agreement with the European Union. Now, if that works, that will be our option. We'll probably should look at more closely we could do more with Japan. But I think a certain amount of focus on, enhanced focus on Latin America and Africa may be in order because that would certainly enable us to diversify more. And also we talk about doing more in terms of the global south, and it will enhance that effort that we are making. So I think these are some of the things that India would need to do, even as it looks at dealing with the challenges related to the US market.
True. In fact, one lever which India has is its market potential and the size, right? And one area where it is really playing out now is oil. So this whole love fest between West Asia and India is largely preceded on the fact that the United States moved out of their market because they started producing their own oil. And India became one of their biggest buyers after China. So we have seen a good example there. Do you see India able to, punch above its weight by leveraging, say, the market size, for example?
I would always say, Anil, that we should punch in accordance with our weight. Not below, not above. Punch in accordance with your weight, it's much more enduring. But I'd say India has two advantages. One is certainly the market size. Second, the tech human capital of India is very, very important. Aside from other things, there is a recognition in the US corporate sector that to maintain their global lead over China in many technologies, including digital technology, they need a partnership with India's tech human capital. Because, which is the other country in the world with 1.4 billion people? If you look at Silicon Valley, look at the presence of Indian origin people in key positions. The global capability centers that we spoke about. 20% of the global talent in semiconductor design is based in India. And then if you saw recently when the US imposed enhanced fees on H-1B visas, there were comments from Germany that they welcome Indians to come to Germany. Canada. So because these countries will see opportunity for themselves. And therefore, if this enables us to diversify more from the US, build further with Europe, Germany, with Canada, I think these are certain things that India will certainly explore. So I would say that, and the other thing is that whatever the US may do with China, and I don't rule out that they may do a trade agreement with China, there's possibility of President Trump meeting President Xi in October, visiting China this year or next. But even as they do that, they have absorbed that their main economic, technological and military rival is China. And they've said publicly that the only country with the intent and capability to replace the US in the international system is China. So if that is so, but at the same time, US is not saying that they're prepared to be number 2 in the world. They still want to be number 1. So if they want to retain their global leadership vis-a-vis China, they will need the India partnership. So I think that's the leverage that we have to try and exercise.
I liked your point about prudence, that you punch according to your weight. But I can't help observing that, say, over the last decade and little over a decade, that India's global presence, it's not just in diplomacy, foreign policy. If you look at sports, for example, chess, and now this Paralympics, this Sheetal Devi, she won the World Championship in archery. We saw the Asia Cup, the swag of the Indian cricket team in actually playing out India's foreign policy strategy there. So do you see that this swag, there is a swag that India has acquired, which, say, okay, let me, earlier India it's already established its resilience to recover from shocks, whether you see COVID, whether you see 91, we have n number of examples. Now, there's a quiet confidence, self-confidence when they approach global issues and global trade negotiations. There is a give and take. India is willing to give as well as take. Like you said right at the beginning, India was inclined to allow more market access to the US than it had done in the past. So this swag, you see that? Do you also notice that swag, and how do you place it in the context of India's future?
No, sure. And swag is important. And after all, the Indian economy is today the 4th largest globally, headed to be the 3rd largest. So, and with some of our other achievements, including in technology sectors, digital technology sector, I think there's reason enough for India to have a certain level of swag. And I think in sports we are doing earlier not as well as we should otherwise have done, but we're certainly coming up in different areas, which is important. I think adds a sense of confidence and also encourages the younger people.
We'll stop at that. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us today.
Thank you, Anand. Delighted to be with you.
It was a nice optimistic note to sign off our conversation. India is actually in a good place at this point of time. But the big worry is not today. The big worry is about 2047. 22 years from now, India wants to become a developed country. Today, it is a developing economy with a per capita income of about $2,700. In 2047, it will have a per capita income of $18,000 if its dreams do fructify. But the uncomfortable truth is that India's economic ambition has to go through Washington and Beijing. Washington till yesterday was not a point of concern, but today it is. So in a sense, this puts the spotlight back on India. There's a lot that India needs to do domestically. And this well may be the 1991 moment once again for India to dig in its heels, improve its competitiveness, take up the challenge, or rather the gauntlet that has been thrown down by President Trump and China to an extent. But we'll only know in the future as to where things stand. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNewsGlobal.Tech on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please, to share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on X at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.